Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Fans of the Harry Potter books have long agreed on one thing. The movies, no matter how beautiful they looked, lost countless key details. Sometimes important scenes were simply cut. Sometimes they were shortened and simplified to the point where the meaning vanished. Today I want to show you several such moments that could have completely changed the way we perceived the story. Let's sort them out together. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Tom Riddle's backstory. One of the greatest omissions of the entire film saga is Tom Riddle's story. The movies showed him only in passing, a brief scene at the orphanage, a couple of conversations, and that was it. But in the books we get much more. We learn about his mother, Merope Gaunt, who tricked his muggle father into staying with her using a love potion, about the dark roots of the family, the cursed blood of the Gaunts, and how his cruel, cold psyche was formed. We witness how young Tom step by step moves toward the idea of Horcruxes. In the movies, all of this was reduced to a couple of hints, yet we're talking about the main antagonist of the entire story. Cutting this storyline deprived viewers of the chance to understand how exactly a boy turned into Lord Voldemort. Number 2. The Marauders. Another untold story is the fate of the Marauders. The map, which became a cult artifact, suddenly appears without explanation. Well, why does it exist? Who created it? In the books, everything is revealed. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew were friends who created the map to track movements around Hogwarts and help Lupin during his transformations. In the movies, viewers never get this knowledge. Lupin, for example, simply knows about the map, and that's it. For book readers, this wasn't a problem, but those who only saw the films lost an entire layer of important history, showing just how deep the bonds were between Harry's father and his friends. Number 3. Neville's parents, Neville. Longbottom's story in the books is far more tragic than in the films. We see him as an awkward, insecure student who is often underestimated, but the scene at St. Mungo's Hospital could have completely changed viewers' perception of this character. In the books, Harry, Ron, and Hermione accidentally meet Neville while he is visiting his parents, Alice and Frank Longbottom. They were driven insane after being tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange and remained in the hospital forever. This scene not only shows Neville's personal tragedy, but also his incredible inner strength. A boy who endured this still continues to fight. The films skipped it, and viewers never learned the true depth of his character. Number 4. The Half-Blood Prince. The movie, The Half-Blood Prince, is often called the weakest of the series, largely because the key storyline was cut short. In the books, the entire mystery of Snape's nickname is revealed: his past, his bond with Lily Evans, his thirst for knowledge, and his complicated fate. But in the movie, it all ends with one short line: "I am the Half-Blood Prince." For viewers, it meant nothing. No backstory, no explanation, no dramatic depth. As a result, the mysterious title of the film lost all meaning. Number 5. The importance of Dobby. And finally, Dobby, the house elf beloved by millions, who played a huge role in the books, was reduced to an episodic character in the movies. In the books, it was he who helped Harry find the Room of Requirement and who gave him Gillyweed for the second task of the Triwizard Tournament. Dobby was a loyal ally who repeatedly saved Harry and his friends, but in the movies we see only his first appearance and his heartbreaking death. Everything else was cut. What's more, the entire subplot with House Elves and Hermione's SPEW, Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, disappeared completely, along with the character Winky. This was a huge loss for understanding how the wizarding world treated its servants and how Hermione fought for justice. Number 6. Peeves, the poltergeist. Peeves was chaos made flesh. The poltergeist swooped through Hogwarts singing rude songs, dropping ink bottles and pelting students with chalk. Teachers groaned at his pranks, yet he gave the school its pulse of mischief. In Order of the Phoenix, his loyalty shone when Fred and George Weasley left Hogwarts in a blaze of fireworks. As they departed, Fred shouted, "Give her hell from us, Peeves!" For once, Peeves saluted. From that moment, he waged war on Dolores Umbridge, overturning desks and blocking corridors, driving her to fury. The films erased him completely. Without Peeves, Hogwarts lost its spirit of unpredictable mayhem. He was not just comic relief, but part of the soul of the castle, a reminder that Hogwarts lived and breathed with more than just professors and students. His absence silenced a vital thread of rebellion, stripping away humor and resistance that made the books shine. Number 7, The House of Black and Kreacher. Number 12, Grimmauld Place was more than a safe house. In the book, it was steeped in history, every wall whispering the pride and decay of the Black family. The ancient tapestry with its scorched-out names told a story of bloodlines and betrayal. Sirius showed Harry the place where his own name had been blasted away, proof of his rejection by his family. "My mother's masterpiece," Sirius said bitterly, pointing to the wall where the faces of the pure blacks glared down. Kreacher embodied that bitterness. He despised Sirius, clinging to the twisted ideals of the old family. His mutterings in the shadows were filled with venom. "Filthy blood traitor, shame of my mistress's house." Yet Kreacher was not just a nuisance. His divided loyalties played a crucial role, leading him to betray information that set events in motion. Rowling used him to show how the legacy of a family could poison generations, and how cruelty left scars deeper than blood. The films reduced Grimmauld Place to a backdrop. Kreacher appeared only briefly, stripped of the depth that made his eventual redemption powerful in the books. Without the history of the Black family, Sirius's loneliness and anger lost context. The audience never saw the house as a symbol of everything Sirius had fled, yet could never escape. What in the book was a character itself, dark, tragic, and alive, became in the films nothing more than a set of walls. Number 8, The Battle of Hogwarts in detail. In the book, the Battle of Hogwarts was chaos and bravery intertwined. Professors like McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout led the defense of the castle. Centaurs emerged from the Forbidden Forest, arrows raining down on Death Eaters. Even the House Elves, led by Kreacher, stormed into the fight wielding kitchen knives. Rowling painted it as a united stand, every corner of Hogwarts alive with defiance. It was not just Harry's war, it was everyone's. The losses were devastating. Fred Weasley's death hit hardest. One moment he was laughing at Percy's joke, the next a blast ripped through the corridor. Rowling wrote, "The ghost of his last laugh still etched upon his face." Readers felt the gut punch, the silence in the middle of battle. Tonks and Lupin fell too, leaving behind their newborn son, Teddy. Harry's walk through the Great Hall, seeing the bodies of those he loved, gave weight to the cost of victory. The films did not linger on these moments. Fred's death flashed by, Tonks and Lupin's sacrifice barely shown. The centaurs and house elves never appeared. What should have been a sweeping portrait of unity and loss became a condensed duel between Harry and Voldemort. The book's power lay in its details, the laughter silenced, the kitchen knives raised, the arrows flying. Without them, the films lost the heart of the battle, the sense that Hogwarts itself rose to fight. Number 9, Fleur and Bill's romance. In the books, Fleur Delacour's love for Bill Weasley became one of the most moving storylines. After Bill was mauled by Fenrir Greyback during the battle at Hogwarts, his face was left permanently scarred. The Weasley family feared Fleur might abandon him. Molly Weasley even whispered that maybe it would be better if Fleur reconsidered the engagement. But Fleur's response was fierce and unforgettable. "I am beautiful enough for both of us," she said, her voice blazing with loyalty. This moment revealed Fleur's true character. Many had dismissed her as vain, shallow, or only interested in Bill for his looks and status. Instead, she showed strength. She showed that love was more than appearances. Standing in the Burrow's kitchen, Defying Molly, Fleur proved that she belonged in the Weasley family, not as an outsider, but as a woman of courage and devotion. The wedding that followed carried a different weight because of this. When Harry, disguised as a red-headed boy, through Polyjuice Potion, attended Bill and Fleur's wedding, the event symbolized more than union. It was resilience. Despite war, scars, and loss, they chose love. The books allowed readers to feel the hope and defiance of that day, a brief light before Voldemort's shadow fell over everything. The films brushed past all of it. Fleur was reduced to a minor background figure, her bravery erased. Bill appeared suddenly in Deathly Hallows, scarred but unexplained, as if his story began off-screen. The audience never saw the fire in Fleur's declaration, nor the bond that made their marriage powerful. Without this arc, the films lost a love story that stood as one of Rowling's most human and tender. Number 10. The political side of the Triwizard Tournament. The Triwizard Tournament was never just about dragons and mermaids. In the books, it carried the weight of politics. The arrival of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang turned Hogwarts into a stage where nations displayed pride and power. Madame Maxime's towering presence and Igor Karkaroff's sly ambition made every interaction tense. When Harry's name came out of the Goblet of Fire, Karkaroff sneered, "I protest, this is most irregular." It was more than anger at a boy's inclusion, it was suspicion between countries. Beauxbaton, with Fleur Delacour, represented French elegance, grace, and a touch of arrogance. Durmstrang, with Victor Krum, brought the shadow of Eastern Europe, a school rumoured to teach the dark arts. Their students carried cultural pride, and every meal in the Great Hall became a meeting of worlds. Rowling even wrote of how the students sang their anthems, filling the air with rivalry. "We are Durmstrang, proud and strong," they declared. These moments reminded readers that the wizarding world was larger than Britain. This international gathering also raised questions of diplomacy. Cornelius Fudge worried about how foreign ministries would view the chaos in Hogwarts. Barty Crouch Sr., representing the ministry, acted like a politician balancing fragile agreements. His sudden decline into madness was not just personal tragedy, it hinted at the instability of institutions meant to hold peace. Through the tournament, Rowling revealed how thin the line was between friendly rivalry and political disaster. The films erased almost all of this. They kept the spectacle of dragons and the Yule Ball, but cut the tension between schools and the uneasy diplomacy. Without those details, the tournament shrank into a mere contest between Harry and Cedric. The grand political stage, where every spell echoed with international consequence, was gone. What remained was thrilling, yes, but stripped of the larger world that made the Wizarding Society feel alive and fragile at the same time. Number 11. Ariana Dumbledore's story. Ariana Dumbledore's story was one of the most haunting in the books, yet the films only whispered about it. As Aberforth revealed in Deathly Hallows, Ariana was attacked by Muggle boys when she was just 6 years old. The assault left her scarred, unable to control her magic. She wouldn't use it, but she couldn't get rid of it, Aberforth told Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Ariana's bursts of uncontrolled magic kept her hidden from the world. To protect her, their mother Kendra confined her to their home in Godric's Hollow. But tragedy struck again. Ariana's uncontrollable power exploded one day, killing Kendra instantly. This accident was the breaking point for the Dumbledore family. Aberforth carried his sister's burden with quiet devotion, while Albus struggled with bitterness. When Gellert Grindelwald appeared in Godric's Hollow, Albus finally found a friend who matched his brilliance. The two dreamed of reshaping the world for the greater good, while Ariana remained locked away, a silent reminder of their family's brokenness. The final tragedy came during a violent confrontation between Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald. In the chaos, Ariana was killed, No one knew whose spell had struck her. Aberforth's grief turned into rage against his brother. "You never cared about her," he screamed years later. For Albus, Ariana's death became the wound that defined his life. He refused power, refused the ministry, and carried guilt so heavy that even Harry sensed it when they spoke in King's Cross. The films chose not to show any of this. Without Ariana, Albus Dumbledore became only a wise old mentor, not a man haunted by loss. The audience never saw why he avoided positions of ultimate authority or why he feared his own ambition. Ariana's story explained his demons, his caution, and his compassion. Without her, the films lost a vital key to understanding the greatest wizard of his age. Number 12, Firenze and the Fate of the Centaurs. When Professor Sybil Trelawney was dismissed by Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, readers witnessed a moment that could have broken the divination class forever. But Albus Dumbledore did something unexpected. He brought in Firenze, a centaur from the Forbidden Forest, to teach the students. For the first time, a creature long considered distant and proud stepped into the role of professor. It wasn't just about filling a position, it was about bridging two worlds that had rarely trusted each other. Firenze's lessons were strikingly different from Trelawney's vague predictions. He used the night sky as his guide. "Mars is bright tonight," he told the students, echoing the ominous warnings he had spoken years earlier when Harry first met him. In those classes, the centaur revealed the deeper, older magic of the stars, a kind of divination far removed from teacups and crystal balls. Harry, Hermione, and their classmates glimpsed a way of thinking that belonged not to wizards, but to another race entirely. This storyline also showed the sharp divisions within centaur society. Firenze was banished from his herd for agreeing to work with humans. His fellow centaurs saw this as betrayal, a surrender of their independence and pride. The scar left by that choice followed him into Hogwarts, making every lesson not just about the stars, but about the cost of defying his people. Through him, Rowling revealed that prejudice and pride ran deep, even in magical creatures often idealized by wizards. The films cut this thread entirely. Without Firenze, viewers missed a chance to see how complex the magical world could be. They never saw the centaur walking through the castle's corridors, his hooves echoing on the stone floors, or the stunned faces of students watching a creature of myth explain the future through constellations. They missed the pain of his exile and the dignity with which he carried it. That absence left the magical universe in the films smaller, less layered, and far less alive. Number 13, Percy Weasley's ambition. Percy Weasley's journey is one of the most painful and yet most illuminating threads in J.K. Rowling's novels, and it is one that the films almost entirely ignored. In the books, Percy represents the tension between ambition and loyalty, between climbing the ladder of the ministry and standing with his family. His arc is quiet but devastating, a reminder that betrayal does not always come from strangers or enemies, but can emerge from the people closest to you. The films reduced Percy to a background presence, a red-haired figure standing awkwardly in group shots, but in the novels his choices tore through the Weasley family like a jagged wound. His eventual reconciliation in the final battle brought one of the series' most bittersweet notes, because his story was not about magic or heroism, but about pride, shame, and the courage to admit mistakes. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Percy's break with his family becomes visible and personal. Cornelius Fudge, terrified of Dumbledore's influence, cultivates Percy as a loyal subordinate in the ministry, giving him the position of junior assistant to the minister. It was a dazzling achievement for Percy, who always sought recognition, but it came at a price. Percy's letter to Ron was the clearest sign of betrayal. He wrote, "I sincerely hope you are not following a bad example by associating with Harry Potter. You are at the age when you are most vulnerable to the wrong sort of crowd." This was not merely caution, it was condescension, rejection, and a refusal to believe Harry or Dumbledore. Percy positioned himself as the voice of reason, but in reality, he was swallowing the propaganda of the ministry. For his parents, this was a heartbreak. Molly cried openly about it, and Arthur, while quieter, carried the disappointment heavily. In the Weasley household, the absence of Percy was louder than any argument. The books used Percy's betrayal to explore the fragility of family unity. The Weasleys are often presented as the warm counterbalance to the coldness of the Dursleys or the Malfoys, but Percy's departure shattered that image. Fred and George mocked him, calling him Ministry's pet, but underneath their jokes was hurt. Ginny felt his absence too, though less outspokenly. Bill and Charlie were far away, but even they understood what his decision meant. The Weasleys were not a perfect family immune to conflict. They were human, torn between love and anger. Rowling used Percy to show that the war against Voldemort did not only create divisions in society but also in families, echoing the way real-world conflicts drive wedges between parents and children, brothers and sisters. Percy's estrangement is particularly important when one considers his ambition. From the very beginning, Percy was different from his brothers. While Fred and George valued laughter, while Ron longed for recognition in Harry's shadow, Percy valued order, rules, and advancement. He was the prefect, the head boy, the one polishing his badge rather than flying on a broomstick. His ambitions were not inherently wrong, but they blinded him. When Fudge dangled prestige before him, Percy grasped it without hesitation. This blindness is crucial to his character. He was not evil, nor was he cruel. He was simply so desperate to prove himself that he abandoned those who loved him. That subtlety is what the films erased when they pushed him into the background. Without his betrayal, Percy is just another sibling, but with it he becomes a mirror for every reader who has chosen career over family or pride over humility. The narrative consequences of Percy's absence in the films are immense. In the books, Harry sees Percy at the Ministry, aligned against Dumbledore's supporters, and the sting of it deepens the sense of isolation. When Percy returns home for Christmas in the Order of the Phoenix, it is not to reconcile but to deliver a message from the Ministry, and Molly's sobs after he storms out are one of the most heartbreaking moments in the series. That moment humanizes the cost of loyalty to the wrong cause. Readers saw Molly as a mother struggling with not only the war, but also the fact that one of her own children chose pride over love. In the films, this powerful subplot is missing, leaving Molly only as the motherly figure who stands by her children without cracks in the foundation. Rowling's writing makes Percy's betrayal all the more cutting because she builds it with precision. Percy is not seduced by Voldemort, nor does he crave power in the same way as someone like Barty Crouch Jr. He is seduced by respectability. The Ministry is his idol, the badge of success he has long dreamed of. His betrayal is not spectacular. It is bureaucratic, polite, and terrifyingly ordinary. That ordinariness is what makes it relatable. Many readers recognized a part of themselves in Percy, the desire to be recognized, the fear of failure, the temptation to align with authority rather than resist. By the time Percy sees the truth, it is almost too late, and that delay costs him years of estrangement from his family. Number 14, Rita Skeeter's Secret. In the books, Rita Skeeter is more than a caricature of the intrusive journalist that the films briefly portray. She is a reminder of how dangerous words can be, especially when written by someone who has no scruples about twisting the truth. In the fourth book, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, her presence looms large. She lurks at the edges of the Triwizard Tournament, scribbling with her acid-green quick quotes quill, eager to make Harry appear unstable and to portray Hermione as a manipulative schemer. This portrayal in the novels is a form of manipulation that feels sinister because it attacks not only Harry, but also the trust others have in him. By comparison, the films reduce her role to a few sneering moments, robbing audiences of the layers of danger and eventual irony that J.K. Rowling wove into the character. One of the most fascinating aspects of Rita Skeeter is the secret she hides from the wizarding world. Unlike in the films, where she vanishes after a short burst of screen time, the books give her an arc that ties directly into the fight against Voldemort. She is an unregistered animagus, capable of turning into a beetle. This detail is not just a quirky piece of trivia, but the explanation for how she always manages to overhear the most private conversations. In The Goblet of Fire, Rowling seeds this revelation carefully. Readers are shown Rita appearing in places she should not be, publishing information she could not have known. The mystery builds until Hermione solves it with her usual sharp observation, plucking a beetle from a window during a crucial scene and realizing its true identity. The films ignored this twist, eliminating a vital example of Hermione's brilliance and the consequences of Rita's deceit. The payoff of this discovery is both satisfying and morally complex. Hermione traps Rita in a small glass jar, keeping her locked in her beetle form until she agrees to stop writing damaging articles. This is not just a victory over a nosy reporter, but a demonstration of how the trio begins to wield power in unexpected ways. Hermione, normally the voice of rules and fairness, takes justice into her own hands, holding Skeeter prisoner. In The Goblet of Fire, the text reads, "You are an unregistered animagus, and you are in a great deal of trouble." This line reflects Hermione's stern authority, a side of her character that the films rarely allow to shine. The omission strips away the complexity of how far these young heroes were willing to go to protect themselves and the truth. The irony of Skeeter's situation is that the very tool she used to harm Harry and his friends, her quill and her words, later becomes the weapon that aids them. In The Order of the Phoenix, the wizarding community refuses to believe Voldemort has returned. The Ministry, under Cornelius Fudge, actively suppresses the truth. It is in this climate of denial that Hermione strikes a deal with Rita Skeeter. She forces her to write a truthful article for the Quibbler, Xenophilius Lovegood's eccentric magazine. The piece is not published in the Daily Prophet, which by then had been turned into a tool of propaganda, but in a fringe paper that most wizards dismiss. Still, the article carries weight. Hermione explains, "We need someone who will write the truth. Rita can do that if she is persuaded." Without Skeeter's quill, Harry's testimony about Voldemort's return might never have reached the public. The films erase this entire subplot, presenting the Quibbler and Xenophilius Lovegood only in the 7th installment, stripped of this history. As a result, audiences never see the chain of unlikely alliances that were necessary to fight the rising darkness. Rita Skeeter, unwilling ally though she is, becomes part of the resistance against Voldemort, not because she believes in Harry, but because she is coerced. This dynamic underscores one of Rowling's recurring themes, that victory is rarely clean or simple. Sometimes the truth must be spread by compromised people, and sometimes heroes must make uncomfortable bargains. The consequences of Rita's articles ripple far beyond a single magazine issue. In The Order of the Phoenix, once the article about Harry is published in the Quibbler, it circulates underground, passed from hand to hand at Hogwarts. Students whisper about it in corridors, and even those who doubted Harry begin to reconsider. The text describes how, for the first time, the school seemed to be taking Harry seriously. The truth had power, but it only became powerful because Rita Skeeter, of all people, wrote it down. The narrative is tinged with irony. The same journalist who once smeared Harry with lies is now his most unlikely messenger. Without her, Dumbledore's army might have been harder to form, and resistance might have faltered before it began. Hermione's handling of Skeeter also shows her growing maturity. She recognizes the danger of letting Skeeter roam free, but also the opportunity in using her talents. This is a step away from her earlier idealism. In The Goblet of Fire, she simply wanted Rita punished. By the Order of the Phoenix, she understands leverage. This development matters because it marks Hermione not just as a brilliant student, but as a strategist. The films, by omitting Skeeter's secret, robbed audiences of this progression, leaving Hermione's arc flatter than in the novels. Readers saw her transition from a follower of rules to a leader capable of bending them when survival demanded it. Number 15, Dudley Dursley's Redemption. Of all the relationships Harry Potter carried through his life, perhaps none was as quietly profound as the one he shared with his cousin Dudley Dursley. From the very first chapter of Philosopher's Stone, Dudley is painted as a caricature of spoiled cruelty, the boy who counted his birthday presents and found 36 not enough, the child who revelled in tormenting Harry at every turn. For years, readers were meant to despise him just as Harry did, and yet in the final book, Deathly Hallows, J.K. Rowling gifted Dudley with a moment of humanity so unexpected and touching that it redefined everything we thought we knew about him. At that moment, Dudley's halting acknowledgement that Harry mattered to him was a turning point not only for his character, but for Harry's entire connection to the family that had both raised and mistreated him. The tragedy, however, is that this powerful piece of storytelling never reached the screen. The films, eager to rush into the grand battles of magic and destiny, left this quiet yet essential scene behind, depriving audiences of one of the rare glimpses of genuine reconciliation between Harry and the people who shaped his earliest years. When Deathly Hallows begins, Harry is preparing to leave Privet Drive for the last time. The Dursleys, placed under protective custody because Voldemort's followers might target them, are forced to abandon the home they clung to so fiercely. In this setting, Rowling allows Dudley's transformation to surface. He no longer appears as the same petulant boy who once tried to punch Harry while whining to his mother about sweets. Instead, Rowling writes a scene that breathes with restraint and quiet power. Dudley, awkward and stiff, steps forward and mutters that he doesn't think Harry is a waste of space. These words, so simple on the surface, carry a weight that reverberates through the entire series. For a cousin who had defined Harry by ridicule and rejection, to acknowledge his worth, even in this halting way, was monumental. The novel underscores this change through Harry's own stunned reaction. For the first time, Harry sees Dudley not as a tormentor or as a symbol of everything wrong in his childhood, but as a person trying to bridge an impossible gap. Rowling describes Harry's surprise, noting that he almost wished the Dementors had returned so that Dudley's soul-bearing admission might be brushed aside. It is a darkly humorous but deeply telling moment. Harry, so used to disdain from this family, doesn't quite know how to receive affection from them. This discomfort is not rejection, it is disbelief. Dudley's words challenge the story Harry has carried for his entire life, that his mother's family would never see him as anything other than a burden. The emotional resonance of this moment lies in how understated it is. Rowling does not give Dudley grand speeches or exaggerated displays of regret. Instead, the transformation of his character comes in a muttered phrase almost swallowed by his own awkwardness. That is precisely what makes it believable. Dudley's growth is not that of a hero's journey, but of a boy who, having been pampered and shielded, finally glimpses reality and makes a choice to step toward decency. In a story saturated with dragons, horcruxes, and epic duels, it is remarkable how much power lies in a single, ordinary line. I don't think you're a waste of space. This scene also provides Harry with something he never received from Vernon or Petunia. Validation that his existence mattered. While Petunia once held knowledge of her sister's world and Vernon's hostility was obvious, Dudley had always been the mindless enforcer of their cruelty. To hear him express something close to gratitude, or at least respect, altered the trajectory of Harry's memory of his upbringing. Rowling implies that Harry will never forget those words, however clumsy. They transform Dudley into the only Dursley who dared to change. The films, however, denied viewers this catharsis. In Deathly Hallows, Part 1, the Dursleys appear only in a brief farewell sequence. There is no attempt at reconciliation, no whispered confession from Dudley, no acknowledgement of Harry's humanity. Instead, the characters simply pack their things, leave, and vanish from the narrative. For audiences who had followed these characters for a decade on screen, the absence of this moment was glaring. The Dursleys had been such a formative presence in Harry's life, shaping his loneliness and resilience, and yet the cinematic story concluded their role with a whimper rather than a reckoning. The impact of this omission cannot be overstated. By stripping the story of Dudley's growth, the films preserve the Dursleys as flat antagonists, little more than cartoonish obstacles in Harry's early years. The books, however, painted them with greater complexity. Dudley's admission, though brief, demonstrated that even the most entrenched cruelty can give way to change, however imperfect. It was a small redemption, but a necessary one, reminding readers that humanity exists even in unlikely places. By erasing it, the films robbed the story of one of its most universal truths, that reconciliation, however small, has the power to heal old wounds. The omission also cost audiences the chance to see Harry react to this new dynamic. One of the strengths of Rowling's writing is her willingness to explore Harry's inner conflict, the tug-of-war between his lingering resentment and his instinctive hope for connection. Dudley's moment in the book allowed Harry to experience something rare, surprise that kindness could come from where he least expected it. In the film, Harry's departure from Privet Drive becomes transactional, with no emotional weight tethering him to the past. The sense of closure that the novel provides, an ending not of love but of acknowledgement, is absent. Number 16. Crabbe and Goyle's role. Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle were never meant to be the brightest students in Hogwarts. In the films, they are little more than shadows that flank Draco Malfoy, silent enforcers whose presence adds menace without substance. Yet in J.K. Rowling's books, their presence extends far beyond comic relief or bullying. They represent the loyal but often tragic figures who become entangled in forces they do not fully understand. Their story, especially Crabbe's final act in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, is one of those overlooked threads where the films reduced the richness of the narrative to mere background noise, stripping away an essential dramatic note that made the books so powerful. From their first appearance in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Crabbe and Goyle are portrayed as more than just mindless muscle. Rowling makes it clear that while they are slow-witted, they are not without agency. Their choice to follow Draco Malfoy is less about servitude and more about shared ideology, family connections, and ambition. In the books, their fathers are both Death Eaters, which places the boys firmly within the dark tradition of pure blood supremacy. This background frames them not as faceless bullies, but as children born into an ideology they had little chance of escaping. The films erased these layers, leaving the audience with flat caricatures and stripping the eventual climax of its proper weight. The most glaring omission appears in the Room of Requirement during Deathly Hallows. In the novel, Harry, Ron, and Hermione are searching for Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem, only to be confronted by Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. The confrontation spirals into chaos when Crabbe makes a choice that changes everything. He unleashes Fiend Fire, a cursed magical fire described as nearly impossible to control. Rowling writes vividly, "The fire was a living thing, twisting, contorting, forming snake-like coils that writhed to the ceiling and licked the walls. This is not a casual outburst, it is a moment of reckless ambition, a desperate attempt to destroy Harry, even if it means scorched earth." The decision highlights Crabbe's growth into someone who is capable of violence on a terrifying scale, not just a schoolyard bully. What makes the scene haunting is its aftermath. The fiend fire, uncontrollable and deadly, consumes Crabbe himself. In his hubris, he becomes the victim of his own weapon. Harry reflects with horror as the flames consume everything. Crabbe had been swallowed by the fire, and his body was gone, lost in the inferno he had created. This is a tragic irony. A boy who was never allowed depth in the earlier books dies because he attempts to wield power too great for him. It is a deeply symbolic moment about the danger of hatred and the destructive nature of dark magic. The films, however, did not give Crabbe this ending. Instead, the role of unleashing the cursed fire was handed to Blaise Zabini, an entirely different character, while Crabbe was quietly removed due to behind-the-scenes reasons with the actor. The emotional resonance was lost. By erasing Crabbe's fiery death, the films also robbed Draco Malfoy's arc of an important layer. In the book, Draco is horrified by what happens. He does not mourn openly, but the shock of watching his friend consumed by magic underscores his own fragile position in the war. Malfoy's reliance on Crabbe and Goyle is a thread woven through every book, and losing one of them in such a violent way illustrates the collapse of the world he has always known. This death is not just Crabbe's tragedy, it is Draco's too. Yet in the films, Draco's reaction is muted because the context has been altered. Instead of witnessing the downfall of his longtime companion, he is forced into a generic survival scene that has none of the layered emotional meaning. The Fiendfire scene also demonstrates Rowling's mastery in using even minor characters to reveal the wider themes of the story. Crabbe's moment is not random spectacle. It shows how Voldemort's ideology poisons even the youth who are raised in its shadow. Crabbe attempts to mimic the destructive methods of Death Eaters, but in his inexperience and arrogance he cannot control it. His death becomes a cautionary tale of how Voldemort's promises of power destroy his followers as much as his enemies. The book makes this crystal clear by contrasting Crabbe's reckless magic with Harry's desperate attempts to save everyone in the room, including Draco and Goyle. Harry risks his life to pull them out of the flames, while Crabbe dies by his own hand. This juxtaposition embodies the moral divide between the Dark Lord's path and Harry's. Rowling reinforces the emotional impact by weaving in Harry's perspective. As he watches Crabbe perish, he does not feel triumph. Instead, there is shock and horror. Crabbe was his enemy, but his death is neither celebrated nor trivialized. This reaction mirrors the central theme of the series. Even in war, human life matters. When Dobby dies earlier in the book, Harry grieves. When Fred Weasley dies, the pain is unbearable. And even when a character like Crabbe dies, who brought Harry nothing but trouble, the tone is still mournful. The loss of a young life to dark magic is treated with the gravity it deserves. This humanistic touch makes the moment powerful, and its absence in the films turns the sequence into a shallow action spectacle. The omission also denies Goyle his own share of development. In the novel, he is portrayed as terrified of Crabbe's decision, trying to stop him, but ultimately swept into the chaos. He survives because Harry saves him, dragging him away from the flames. This detail is crucial. Harry does not discriminate between friend and foe when lives are at risk. Saving Goyle, who had once tried to harm him countless times, reflects Harry's defining quality: compassion, even for those who hate him. The films, in reducing Crabbe and Goyle to little more than filler, strip away this powerful display of Harry's character. Without Crabbe's death and Goyle's rescue, the scene loses the moral core that Rowling so carefully built. Consider also the symbolic role of the Fiendfire itself. It is no coincidence that Crabbe, of all characters, is the one to unleash it. Throughout the series, fire has been both destructive and purifying. Dumbledore's fire in the cave during Half-Blood Prince is protective and controlled. Molly Weasley's duel with Bellatrix, where she channels her fury into powerful spells, is another example of fire used with purpose. Crabbe's Fiendfire, however, is chaos incarnate. It is fire without discipline, without compassion, an embodiment of destructive hatred. By choosing Crabbe as its wielder, Rowling creates a tragic emblem of corrupted youth consumed by the very darkness he embraced. The films, by handing the act to Zabini, sever this symbolic thread. Another overlooked detail is how Crabbe's death contributes to the larger balance of losses on both sides. Rowling does not shy away from showing that the war claims the lives of both heroes and villains. Fred Weasley dies, but so does Crabbe. Remus Lupin falls, but so does Bellatrix Lestrange. The message is clear: no one is spared when hatred fuels destruction. By skipping Crabbe's death, the films made the war feel lopsided, focusing only on the deaths of beloved characters while erasing the costs among the antagonists' ranks. This simplification undermines the realism and moral complexity of the conflict. It is also worth noting how Rowling subtly foreshadows Crabbe's fate. Throughout the books, Crabbe is more aggressive than Goyle, quicker to use violence, and often the one most eager to follow Draco's lead in bullying. In Chamber of Secrets, when Harry and Ron use Polyjuice Potion to impersonate them, it is Crabbe's persona that is marked by a surly and hostile demeanour. By the time of Deathly Hallows, this aggression has matured into something dangerous. The Fiendfire is not an accident. It is the culmination of years of anger, hatred, and blind loyalty. His death is the inevitable conclusion of his character arc, however minor it seemed at first glance. The emotional devastation of the scene also serves as a mirror to the wider tragedy of the war. Crabbe is not much older than Harry. He grew up in the same castle, studied the same subjects, and walked the same halls. His death is a stark reminder that the war consumes children too. The books make this brutally clear, while the films chose to simplify the conflict into a battle of good versus evil with fewer shades of grey. By denying Crabbe this fate, the films softened the harsh truth Rowling wanted her readers to confront. The artistic failure lies not just in what was omitted, but in what replaced it. The fiery climax of the Room of Requirement in the films is reduced to spectacle. Viewers see a wildfire chase Harry and his friends, but there is no sense of tragedy, no moral weight, no recognition of the cost. It is action without consequence. The diadem is destroyed, but the human story that gives the moment meaning is erased. The books used Crabbe's death to bind together themes of loyalty, corruption, compassion, and the dangers of power. The films left audiences with a hollow shell. In the end, Crabbe and Goyle deserved more than what the films offered them. They were not heroes, nor were they meant to be. But in their loyalty, their mistakes, and their ultimate fates, they carried echoes of the larger struggle that defined the wizarding world. By silencing their story, the films left an unfinished note in the symphony of Harry Potter, one that readers of the books still hear long after they close the final page. Crabbe's Fiendfire was more than just fire. It was a warning, a tragedy, and a testament to the cost of choosing darkness, and without it, the films lost a piece of the truth that made the books unforgettable. Number 17, Gringotts and the Goblins' Distrust. The goblins of the Harry Potter universe represent one of the most overlooked yet essential storylines in J.K. Rowling's books, and nowhere is this more evident than in the way Gringotts' wizarding bank is portrayed. In the novels, the goblins are not mere background creatures who tally up gold and guard vaults. They are a proud, deeply mistrustful race with centuries of grievance against wizards. Their history of betrayal, loss of rights, and simmering resentment toward wizardkind adds layers of social and political complexity that the films almost entirely discard. What should have been a storyline about the fragility of alliances and the consequences of greed becomes, in the films, little more than a cinematic heist scene. This diminishes not just the goblins, but also the moral undertones of Harry's final quest. Gringotts itself is described with grandeur in the books, a place of marble halls, guarded entrances, and underground caverns lit with torches, but it is also described as a fortress built on distrust. Goblins guard it because they believe no wizard should be trusted with treasure unless it is locked away under goblin eyes. The rules are strict. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. This inscription at the entrance of the bank foreshadows the moral weight of goblin-wizard relations. The message is not just about protecting gold, it is about reminding every wizard who walks through the doors that goblins still watch for betrayal. In the films, this haunting warning vanishes entirely, replaced by a sterile banking hall that gives no sense of the centuries of suspicion embedded in every brick. Rowling makes clear that the relationship between goblins and wizards is defined by mistrust and conflicting values. Wizards value ownership in terms of possession and inheritance, while goblins view ownership differently. To them, the maker of an object retains ownership unless it is returned. This cultural clash is not trivial. It represents a core reason why goblins resent wizards. The sword of Gryffindor is the most famous example. Goblins considered the sword a goblin-made treasure that should have remained in their hands, while wizards treated it as a family heirloom tied to Hogwarts and Gryffindor's legacy. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Bill Weasley warns Harry, "Goblins don't trust wizards. They consider us liars and cheats. They will never forget that Gryffindor's sword should have been returned after his death." This piece of lore illuminates centuries of resentment, a cultural wound that festers beneath the surface of wizarding society, but the films brush past it without acknowledgement. The Goblin Griphook embodies this tension more than any other character. Introduced in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone as a bank employee who guides Harry to his vault, he re-emerges in Deathly Hallows with a strikingly different role. He is no longer the anonymous figure escorting a boy into the bowels of Gringotts, but a cunning negotiator with his own agenda. Griphook agrees to help Harry, Ron, and Hermione break into Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, but he does so on one condition, that they give him the sword of Gryffindor. This moment is not just a transaction, it is a moral turning point. Harry needs Griphook's help, but the goblin will not be swayed by loyalty or sentiment. His demand shows that alliances in the wizarding world are never pure, and the goblin's bitterness cannot be erased by a common enemy. This storyline raises uncomfortable questions about Harry's world, questions that the films refuse to touch. If the wizarding society truly prides itself on justice and fairness, why are goblins treated as second-class citizens, excluded from wand ownership and constantly cheated out of their treasures? Why are centuries of rebellion and mistrust swept under the rug by a ministry of magic that prefers to pretend harmony exists? In the books, these issues surface again and again, often through Hermione's attempts to fight for elf rights or through conversations about goblin rebellions. Rowling uses these conflicts to show that the wizarding world is far from perfect. It is built on hierarchies and inequalities that mirror the very muggle prejudices wizards claim to despise. The heist at Gringotts in the Deathly Hallows book is far more than a spectacle of dragons and enchanted vaults. It is the culmination of this fraught relationship. Harry and his friends succeed in reaching the Lestrange vault only because they exploit Griphook's knowledge, yet in the process they betray him as he betrays them. The moment Harry is forced to wrest the sword from Griphook's grasp, watching the goblins scream in fury as he disappears with it into the chaos is symbolic of the unbridgeable gulf between their peoples. This betrayal is not simply about a sword. It is about centuries of mistrust crystallizing into one act of desperation. In the film, this nuanced exchange is reduced to a hurried snatch and grab, leaving viewers with the impression of another obstacle conquered rather than a cultural wound reopened. When Griphook vanishes with the sword, Rowling makes sure the reader feels the weight of the betrayal. Harry is tormented by the fact that he did not act nobly, but pragmatically, putting his mission above fairness. It was not supposed to happen like this, the narrative suggests. This is one of the rare times Harry acts in a morally grey area, and it reflects the impossible choices war demands. The films, however, avoid showing Harry in such a compromising light. The theft of the sword comes off as a plot necessity rather than a profound moral compromise. Without this context, the viewers never see Harry grappling with the fact that he, too, is perpetuating the cycle of mistrust between goblins and wizards. The films also strip away the political history surrounding goblins. In the books, their repeated rebellions are mentioned often, not as footnotes, but as reminders that wizarding society is built on fragile foundations. These rebellions, driven by anger at wizarding exploitation, show that goblins have always fought for autonomy. Rowling hints at records of bloodshed, treaties broken, and promises ignored. These details give depth to the idea that Gringotts is not just a bank, but a monument to uneasy coexistence. In the absence of this backstory, the films render goblins as functionaries with little to no narrative purpose. The choice to ignore these elements makes the wizarding world appear far simpler, far less troubled than Rowling intended. There is also irony in the way wizards depend on goblins despite their mistrust. All wizarding families, from the noble Malfoys to the humble Weasleys, rely on Gringotts to guard their wealth. Yet the very institution that keeps their fortunes safe is controlled by beings they refuse to see as equals. This paradox highlights the hypocrisy at the heart of wizard society. They will entrust goblins with their gold, but not with rights. They will admire goblin craftsmanship in artifacts like the Sword of Gryffindor or goblin-made armor, but will deny them full recognition as equal partners in magical civilization. The films never force the audience to confront this hypocrisy, choosing instead to showcase dragonfire and collapsing tunnels. Harry's interactions with Griphook are a study in uneasy alliances. Harry approaches him with desperation, appealing not to friendship but to bargaining. Even then, Harry tries to temper the transaction with kindness, offering honesty where others offered deception. Yet Griphook remains unyielding, his mistrust too ingrained to be soothed by Harry's attempts. This tension reveals much about the legacy of oppression. Even when an individual wizard acts in good faith, the shadow of history looms too large to allow true trust. Rowling portrays this with careful detail, making Griphook neither villain nor ally, but something more ambiguous. The film, in contrast, paints him as a plot device, a pawn to move the heist forward. The Sword of Gryffindor becomes the perfect symbol of this cultural clash. To goblins, it is a masterpiece of goblin smithing, never tarnishing, always imbibing what makes it stronger. To wizards, it is a relic of a house founder, tied to bravery and righteousness. These two visions collide in the scene where Griphook demands the sword as payment. In that demand lies centuries of goblin philosophy, the belief that true ownership cannot be stolen by inheritance or claimed by law. The films rush past this, presenting the sword merely as a tool Harry needs to destroy Horcruxes. By ignoring its layered symbolism, the cinematic adaptation loses the chance to highlight one of the richest moral conflicts of the series. Rowling's narrative suggests that the war against Voldemort is not just about defeating a tyrant, but also about confronting the cracks within wizarding society itself. Prejudices against goblins, elves, centaurs, and even werewolves show how deep inequality runs. The goblin subplot reinforces that Harry's journey is not only external, but also internal, forcing him to recognize the flaws in the world he fights to save. In the absence of these layers, the films unintentionally simplify the moral landscape, creating a binary battle of good versus evil that lacks the depth of Rowling's vision. The neglect of goblin-wizard relations in the films also weakens Hermione's subplot. Her passion for justice, evident in her efforts to free house elves, could have extended naturally into sympathy for goblins. Yet in the films, her moral fire is mostly restricted to academic brilliance and loyalty to Harry. Without the goblin conflict, viewers lose the chance to see Hermione's activism challenged by another oppressed group, and they lose the chance to see Ron's skepticism about goblin trust justified by centuries of history. These tensions, carefully balanced in the books, vanish on screen. Ultimately, the goblins of Gringotts are not meant to be background bankers. They are meant to be a mirror held up to wizarding society. Through them, Rowling explores themes of mistrust, cultural misunderstanding, and the consequences of oppression. The films reduce them to spectacle, erasing the moral ambiguity and historical resonance that make their stories so powerful. By cutting away the cultural weight of Griphook's demand, the betrayal over the sword, and the history of goblin rebellion, the adaptations flatten one of the most important reminders that even in a world of magic, prejudice and mistrust run deep. Number 18. The importance of Quidditch. Of all the threads that weave through J.K. Rowling's books, Quidditch is one of the most vivid, yet it was almost entirely stripped away in the later films. In the novels, the roar of the stadium, the shimmer of scarlet and green banners, and the bludgers spiraling through the air all made Hogwarts feel like a real school with passions, rivalries, and traditions that went far beyond duels in dark corridors. Without Quidditch, the story loses an essential dimension, the chance to see Harry, Ron, Ginny, and others in an arena where courage was tested not by prophecy or prophecy's shadow, but by teamwork, strategy, and nerves of steel. The films gave us the wars, but they muted the games, forgetting that sometimes character is forged just as much on the pitch as in the battlefield. In the books, Harry's Quidditch career began as early as Philosopher's Stone, when he became the youngest seeker in a century. That moment was more than a gimmick. It was the beginning of his identity as someone who could seize opportunities, someone who had talent, recognized not through lineage or fame, but through instinct and quick reflexes. McGonagall's words still echo, "He caught that thing after a 50-foot dive." That one scene did more to cement Harry's place in Gryffindor than any classroom victory ever could. The films touched on this, but they never followed through on the development that stretched across 6 years of matches, losses, victories, and bruises. By the time of Chamber of Secrets, Quidditch had already become a narrative pulse, a rhythm to Hogwarts life. The anticipation of the season, the training sessions, the joy of victory and sting of defeat created a recurring heartbeat in the novels. When Harry's arm was shattered by a rogue bludger and then disastrously mended by Gilderoy Lockhart, the scene showed how Quidditch wasn't just spectacle, but also consequence. It illustrated Harry's vulnerability and the recklessness of adults who were supposed to protect him. On the page, we see the long hospital stay, the dull ache of missing practice, the way the sport became a metaphor for the interruptions and dangers always pressing into his school life. On the screen, these nuances fell away. Ron's Quidditch arc, introduced in Order of the Phoenix, was one of the most poignant examples of Rowling's ability to use sport as a lens for character development. Ron was not naturally confident, nor was he as instantly talented as Harry. His struggle as keeper was riddled with insecurity. He feared the jeers of Slytherin, dreaded letting down his team, and felt overshadowed by his brother's reputations. The book captures this perfectly. He had always been a bit insecure about Quidditch, but now it felt like every save was life or death. Watching Ron overcome those doubts, learning to silence the cruel chants of "Weasley is our king," became a moment of triumph that defined him far beyond any chess match in the first book. The movies reduced this transformation to a footnote, stripping Ron of one of his most humanizing battles. Ginny's story was also intertwined with Quidditch in ways the films ignored almost completely. In the books, Ginny emerges as a bold, daring player who became one of the best chasers Gryffindor ever had. Her skill on the pitch was part of what shaped her independence and earned her respect from her peers, Harry included. It was on the Quidditch field that Ginny displayed the confidence that contradicted her earlier shyness. Rowling wrote, "Ginny had replaced Katie Bell as chaser and was proving herself to be a real asset. This mattered because Ginny's growth was not just tied to her relationship with Harry, but to her own achievements. In the films, her presence shrank to a background figure, robbing her of the athletic fire that made her more than the boy who lived's love interest. Harry's year as captain in Half-Blood Prince was an especially rich part of his arc, one that showed him as a leader beyond the battlefield. Choosing players, dealing with disputes, and rallying his team required a different kind of responsibility. He wasn't leading because destiny demanded it, but because his peers looked to him. That distinction mattered. He had to manage egos, encourage weaker players, and carry the burden of decisions that affected his friends' confidence. Rowling lets us hear his nerves when he organized tryouts. The turnout was greater than expected, and Harry felt a nervous flutter as he realized they were all watching him. This was a schoolboy facing leadership challenges in a microcosm, something far more relatable than ancient prophecies or dark wizards. On screen, this entire evolution was brushed aside. The sense of school spirit, rivalry, and the rhythm of the academic year was tightly bound to Quidditch. When Gryffindor won the cup, it was not just Harry's personal victory, it was an eruption of joy for the entire house, a moment when the underdogs triumphed over the polished arrogance of Slytherin. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry's first cup win was described with such vibrancy. The noise was deafening. Gryffindor had won the Quidditch Cup for the first time since Charlie Weasley had been captain. It was a culmination of years of effort, interrupted seasons and constant struggle. To deny the films this crescendo was to deny the audience a window into the heartbeat of Hogwarts culture. Quidditch also allowed Rowling to use humour and satire. The antics of Lee Jordan as commentator, often clashing with Professor McGonagall, gave the matches a lively voice. His irreverent style brought comic relief, reminding readers that Hogwarts was not only a place of danger, but also of youthful mischief. Phrases like, "Jordan, you are not being impartial," made the stadium scenes sparkle with charm. This sense of vibrancy was absent in the films, where Quidditch sequences were either truncated to a chase sequence or abandoned altogether, flattening the tone into something darker and narrower. The sport also gave us glimpses of other characters outside the main trio: Angelina Johnson's determination as captain, Katie Bell's dedication, Alicia Spinet's reliability. These were not central figures, yet their presence filled the school with life. Even opponents mattered. Draco Malfoy buying his way onto the Slytherin team, complete with Nimbus 2001's, was a sharp commentary on privilege and arrogance. Rowling used Quidditch to underscore themes of fairness, merit, and the corruption of wealth. The films, by sidelining these threads, stripped the story of one of its clearest mirrors of class and rivalry. More than a game, Quidditch was often used as a narrative foil to the looming shadow of Voldemort. Matches would be interrupted by Dementors, by cursed bludgers, by the chaos of politics spilling into school life. Each time, readers were reminded that even in moments of joy, darkness intruded. Yet the game's persistence symbolized resilience, the determination of children to play, compete, and cheer even when the world was falling apart. It was Rowling's way of grounding the magical war in the reality of adolescence. The absence of this duality in the films made Hogwarts feel less like a school under siege and more like a stage for battles alone. The visual spectacle of Quidditch would have been cinematic gold had the films leaned into it with consistency. Sweeping shots of the stadium, the deafening roar of the crowd, the frantic energy of last-minute saves, all could have been recurring highlights. Instead, after the early movies, the sport faded into the background, a relic of Harry's childhood rather than a thread through his adolescence. By doing so, the film suggested that Quidditch was trivial compared to the war, when in fact the books insist the opposite, that life's meaning lies as much in its games as in its battles. It is telling that Harry's firebolt, given at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, was not just a broomstick, but a symbol of trust, loyalty, and joy. Sirius's gift represented freedom, connection, and the thrill of flying, yet the films gave it only fleeting weight. In the books, every Quidditch match Harry played on that broom carried the emotional resonance of his godfather's love. To minimize Quidditch was to minimize the very symbol that carried Harry's memories of Sirius long after his death. Quidditch was also the arena where victory and failure were deeply personal. Harry's injuries, Ron's missed saves, Ginny's daring goals, they all showed that not every battle was won with a wand. Sometimes it was about endurance, about shaking off humiliation, about getting back on the broom after a crushing defeat. In the novels, these lessons built character arcs that paralleled the larger war. The films, by excising them, left characters less nuanced, less textured, and ultimately less relatable. When Harry stood in the middle of the pitch, sweat on his brow, eyes scanning the sky for a glint of gold, readers felt his nerves, his focus, his exhilaration. It was the same boy who would later face Voldemort, but here, in the stadium, he was not the chosen one. He was a teenager desperate not to let down his friends. That humanity is what made the books so enduring. By erasing so much of Quidditch, the films deprived audiences of that ordinary heroism, the victories that came not from destiny, but from heart, practice, and courage. And in that omission, something essential about Hogwarts was lost. Number 19, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks' love story. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks were two characters whose love story could have become one of the most compelling emotional threads in the Harry Potter films, yet what we saw on screen amounted to fleeting glances, a couple of hurried words, and a tragic outcome that felt strangely distant. In the books, their relationship is not only a romance but also a powerful illustration of struggle, resilience, and the defiance of fear. Lupin was scarred not only by his literal condition as a werewolf but also by the emotional weight of shame, poverty, and rejection that had shadowed him since childhood. Tonks, by contrast, embodied vibrancy, light, and a refusal to bow before prejudice. Together they were a portrait of what it means to choose love in the face of overwhelming odds, and this storyline deserved to shine far more brightly in the cinematic adaptations. When J.K. Rowling wrote Lupin's journey, she gave him the depth of a man who was perpetually at war with himself. His fear of passing on lycanthropy to a child was not simply a personal anxiety, it represented the wider stigma that magical society placed upon those who were different. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Lupin confides to Harry about his fears, the tone is heavy with a sense of inevitability. He says, "Sometimes I think it would have been better if I had never married Tonks. My condition makes me unworthy to be a husband, let alone a father." These words reveal a man consumed by guilt before life had even tested him. The tragedy here is that such a confession shows how much more than a monster Lupin truly was. He was human, fragile, and so terribly afraid of hurting those he loved most. The films brushed over this in silence, missing the chance to explore the way love can both expose and heal the deepest insecurities. Tonks, in contrast, was written as a counterpoint to Lupin's hesitancy. In the books, her love was stubborn, almost reckless, but always tender. She never once saw Lupin's condition as something that could lessen her feelings. Instead, she fought against his self-doubt. Rowling describes Tonks during the wedding of Bill and Fleur, where her happiness glows through despite the uncertainty of their world. It is Molly Weasley who proudly announces their marriage, emphasizing that love had triumphed, however briefly, over Lupin's inner torment. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry recalls Tonks's previously bright personality, noticing that her Patronus had changed to reflect a wolf, symbolizing her devotion to Lupin even in her lowest moments. This single detail carries an enormous weight in the story. Tonks's very magical essence transformed out of love, showing that for her, Lupin's burdens were not something to flee from, but something to embrace. The war against Voldemort placed their relationship in constant jeopardy, yet it was precisely within this backdrop of fear and death that their story found its greatest poignancy. Their decision to marry during the chaos of escalating violence demonstrates the theme Rowling returned to repeatedly: love as the most powerful act of rebellion. Unlike other relationships that developed in the series, theirs was not given the luxury of peace or time. Every choice they made was shadowed by the possibility that tomorrow might never come. This urgency is palpable in the pages of the books, but nearly absent in the films. The camera never lingered long enough on their faces to show the small glances of affection, the unspoken promises, or the desperate desire to hold on to each other in the darkness of war. The birth of their son, Teddy Lupin, was meant to crystallize the triumph of their love, yet also the persistence of Lupin's fear. In Deathly Hallows, Lupin is portrayed as a man spiraling with anxiety, even to the point of abandoning Tonks temporarily after Teddy's birth. His confession to Harry at Grimmauld Place is one of the most raw and powerful moments in the series. He admits he considered fleeing his responsibilities because of the terror that his son might inherit his condition. Harry's furious response, accusing Lupin of cowardice, forces him to confront his own weakness. This confrontation humanizes Lupin in a way that should have translated powerfully to screen. Here was a man brave in battle, yet terrified of fatherhood because of the stigma that had poisoned his entire life. It is a narrative that resonates with anyone who has doubted whether they deserve happiness, and it deserved to be illuminated in the films with far more care. The film's treatment of Lupin and Tonks reduces all of this to shadows. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Tonks's emotional decline, connected to Lupin's reluctance, is completely erased. In Deathly Hallows Part 1, their announcement of Teddy's birth is relegated to a brief line of dialogue, so quick and understated that many viewers missed its importance altogether. Their deaths, shown lying hand in hand during the Battle of Hogwarts, could have been unbearably moving had the audience been given the emotional investment built in the books. Instead, their end appeared almost decorative, another pair of bodies among the fallen. The loss of Lupin and Tonks should have been devastating, not just for the wizarding world, but for the viewers, because their story represented the promise of love persisting even in the most cursed of circumstances. Specific passages from the books reveal just how much texture was lost. When Tonks declares, "You see, she wants to marry him even though he's been bitten. She doesn't care." During the heated discussion at the Burrow, Rowling is laying bare the conflict between societal prejudice and personal devotion. Molly Weasley herself, though supportive, hesitates to celebrate, revealing the entrenched fears surrounding werewolves. This moment showed that Tonks's love was radical, almost defiant, against the norms of her society. To cut this thread from the films meant cutting away one of the clearest illustrations of Rowling's recurring theme, the fight against prejudice in all its forms. It is also essential to recognize the symbolic layer that Rowling embedded in their relationship. Lupin was one of the last of the Marauders, the generation who had fought Voldemort the first time. Tonks belonged to the younger generation stepping into the fight. Their union symbolized a bridge between two eras of resistance. Their child, Teddy, was the living embodiment of hope for the future, the proof that despite all the bloodshed, life would continue. This symbolism is hinted at in the books. When Harry, himself an orphan of war, is named Teddy's godfather, it created a parallel. As Harry lost his parents to Voldemort, Teddy lost his to the same struggle. Yet this time, love and community were there to shield him from the isolation Harry once endured. This cycle of tragedy and renewal was one of Rowling's most elegant storytelling arcs, and it was left largely invisible in the films. The absence of detail surrounding Tonks's personal struggles also diminished her character. In the books, her grief when Lupin initially rejects her is described in sharp contrast to her normally playful demeanor. She becomes withdrawn, her appearance dull, her magical abilities strained. Her shifting Patronus was more than a magical quirk. It was a metaphor for the way love alters identity. By ignoring this, the films stripped Tonks of depth, reducing her to little more than comic relief or background presence. Her bravery at the Battle of Hogwarts, her refusal to stay behind even after giving birth, were gestures of fierce devotion, yet they were given almost no space on screen. The tragic culmination of their story in the Battle of Hogwarts, where both fall side by side, is one of the most heartbreaking moments in the books. Rowling lingers just long enough for the reader to feel the weight of their absence, describing them as lying together, pale and still, and the way their hands were almost touching. It is a quiet, devastating image, two people who fought for love and a future that they would never see. The films replicate this tableau visually, but fail to give it the narrative build-up that makes the moment tearful in the books. Without the layers of conflict, sacrifice and devotion that preceded their deaths, the image is emptied of its full emotional power. Looking back, one can see that Lupin and Tonks's story was not merely a subplot. It was a meditation on fear, acceptance, and the defiance of prejudice. Lupin's journey from self-loathing to allowing himself to love and be loved was one of the most human arcs in the series. Tonks's refusal to let fear dictate her choices was equally powerful. Together their story mirrored the broader war against Voldemort, a fight against forces that sought to divide, oppress, and dehumanize. Their love was a rebellion in its own right. To diminish that on screen was to diminish one of the richest veins of meaning running through Rowling's work. For readers who knew their story, the sight of Lupin and Tonks lying lifeless in the Great Hall was unbearable precisely because it was not just the death of two fighters, but the silencing of a love that had dared to defy the world. It was the extinguishing of a light that had flickered stubbornly in the dark. Their absence left Teddy as another child of war, yet also as a symbol of survival. And for Harry, becoming Teddy's godfather was an act of closing the circle, ensuring that this child would not walk alone as he once did. This inheritance of love and duty was one of the strongest emotional anchors in the final book, but it was only lightly sketched in the films. The neglect of this storyline in the cinematic adaptations is perhaps one of the greatest missed opportunities of the franchise. Viewers could have seen not just the grand battles and the iconic duels, but also the quieter, more human struggles that gave the story its heart. Lupin and Tonks deserved to be more than footnotes in Harry's journey. Their love, fragile yet unyielding, was a reminder that even in times of war, people fight not only for survival, but for the chance to love and be loved without fear. The films may have left their story in the shadows, but within the pages of the books their voices still echo with tenderness and tragedy, teaching us that the smallest human choices can carry the greatest weight in the face of darkness. Number 20. Peeves' final role in the battle. Of all the omissions in the Harry Potter films, few are as glaring to devoted readers as the absence of Peeves, the school poltergeist. His mischief and unpredictable energy were more than just comic relief in the books. They represented the untamed ancient spirit of Hogwarts itself. What makes the absence most painful is not simply that his pranks and rhymes were never brought to the screen, but that the arc of his story, culminating in his decisive role during the Battle of Hogwarts, was erased entirely. In J.K. Rowling's writing, Peeves underwent a transformation from a nuisance feared by teachers to a symbol of resistance who fought alongside Harry, Neville, and the others. The films never allowed audiences to witness this startling shift, leaving a void where chaos itself became a weapon against Voldemort's army. Throughout the books, Peeves is consistently portrayed as uncontrollable even by the most powerful figures at the school. Not even Dumbledore or McGonagall could fully rein him in, and yet his loyalty to Hogwarts ran deeper than anyone realized. He respected only one authority, the Bloody Baron, the Slytherin house ghost, whose dark past bound him in silence. Everyone else, from Filch the caretaker to Dolores Umbridge, found themselves targets of his relentless pranks. When Peeves flooded hallways with ink, unscrewed chandeliers, or pelted students with water balloons, it was more than childish disruption. It was a reminder that Hogwarts was alive with unpredictable magic that refused to be tamed. This aspect of his character became essential when the school faced its darkest hour. The moment that crystallizes Peeves's shift comes in the pages of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. As the castle erupted into chaos, Rowling did not forget her poltergeist. In a single vivid description, she gave Peeves his triumphant moment. Peeves was darting through the battle like a particularly malevolent firework, buzzing and zooming and knocking hats off the heads of Death Eaters, pelting them with snargle of pods and howling rude slogans at them. This was no longer the schoolyard prankster simply annoying professors. Peeves had chosen a side, and he made the enemy's fight more difficult with every reckless dive. It was a striking moment of loyalty, showing that even the most chaotic spirit had a place in the defense of Hogwarts. What makes Peeves's absence from the films even more noticeable is the way his contribution echoed the themes of resistance and unity that Rowling threaded throughout the saga. Peeves had always symbolized disobedience against authority, but during the battle he turned that rebellion outward against tyranny. The Death Eaters were not simply invaders, They were the embodiment of oppressive order, the same kind of rule that Peeves had always despised. His attacks were a natural extension of his character. By pelting Death Eaters with projectiles and mocking their authority, he became the spirit of Hogwarts itself, rejecting the invasion with laughter and chaos. The symbolism is powerful. What was once disruptive became a weapon of liberation. The films, by excluding Peeves entirely, robbed viewers of a moment of catharsis. Readers of the books had grown used to his constant presence, his shrill songs, and his irritating interruptions. Yet to see him rise to the occasion in the final battle was to recognize how every corner of Hogwarts, even its most frustrating, contributed to the defense of the school. The poltergeist who once dumped chalk dust on students now hurled weapons at Death Eaters. The omission was not just about one scene, it was about losing the sense that Hogwarts itself had turned against Voldemort. Peeves was the castle's laughter weaponized. Consider how different the tone of the battle scenes might have been if the films had allowed Peeves to soar across the screen. Amid the dark magic, the crumbling walls, and the cries of the wounded, the sight of the poltergeist unleashing chaos would have provided both comic relief and inspiration. His antics could have broken the tension just as Rowling intended. Imagine the moment when Professor McGonagall, strict and unyielding, ordered Peeves earlier in the series to give her hell from us after Umbridge's downfall. That line in the book was already legendary, a recognition from a stern teacher that Peeves's disruption had its place. Carrying that spirit into the battle would have shown that the defenders of Hogwarts used every resource, even mischief, to fight oppression. The loyalty Peeves demonstrated in those moments also shed light on his relationship with the students. While the faculty often treated him as a menace, the younger generation understood him better. Fred and George Weasley, in particular, shared an unspoken bond with him, treating him as a partner in rebellion. Their final salute to Peeves when they left Hogwarts in Order of the Phoenix, "Give her hell from us, Peeves," was more than a farewell. It was a passing of the torch, a request that Peeves continue the spirit of resistance after they were gone. In Deathly Hallows he fulfilled that promise. This continuity between the Weasleys' rebellion and the final defense of Hogwarts gave readers a sense of completion. Without Peeves, the films lost that emotional payoff. There is also a cultural dimension to Peeves's role. Hogwarts was never just a school, it was a living entity with shifting staircases, talking portraits, and hidden rooms. Peeves embodied the castle's unpredictability and its refusal to bow to authority. His final stand during the battle emphasized that even the spirits of the school rejected Voldemort's regime. This theme resonated with the idea that every voice mattered, from the centaurs charging through the forest to the house elves led by Kreacher, wielding kitchen knives. Rowling wove a tapestry of resistance in which even the smallest or most overlooked allies made a difference. Peeves was part of that tapestry, showing that chaos itself could be righteous. By ignoring this thread, the films streamlined the story, but at a cost. While viewers saw giants clashing in the courtyards and spells lighting up the Great Hall, they missed the dimension of magical mischief turned to defense. Without Peeves, the Battle of Hogwarts in the films became grimmer and more linear, lacking the unpredictable texture that the books celebrated. The absence also erased the growth of Peeves' character, from tormentor to protector. Though he never reformed in the traditional sense, his loyalty when it mattered most was a revelation, and it fit the theme of unlikely heroes stepping forward when needed. Rowling's decision to include Peeves in the climax was not incidental. It was a deliberate act of narrative justice, rewarding long-time readers who had endured his antics with the satisfaction of seeing him, finally, channel his chaos against the true enemy. His final contribution reminded readers that Hogwarts was more than just a backdrop for Harry's story. It was a character in itself, and Peeves was its unruly voice. Without him, the films inadvertently silenced that voice, leaving Hogwarts as just a castle rather than a spirited ally in its own defense. One cannot overlook the imagery Rowling crafted when describing Peeves' battle behavior. The image of him buzzing and zooming like a particularly malevolent firework captures not only his mischievous nature, but also his alignment with the festive chaos that Fred and George embodied. Fireworks had once symbolized rebellion in Order of the Phoenix when the twins disrupted Umbridge's rule with a spectacular display. In the final book, Peeves became that firework, carrying their spirit of defiance into the ultimate confrontation. The symbolism of continuity is powerful and deeply satisfying for those who read closely. For fans who had only seen the films, the exclusion of Peeves meant missing a vital thread of Rowling's storytelling. The battle became one of wands, spells, and straightforward duels, while the book showed it was also about spirit, laughter, and the refusal to bow to fear. Peeves turning pranks into weapons demonstrated that resistance does not always come in the form of solemn sacrifice. Sometimes it comes in laughter, hurled in the face of tyranny. That message, so crucial in the text, was absent on screen. The absence of Peeves in the films also robbed McGonagall's earlier line of its payoff. When she told Peeves to give Umbridge hell, it was a moment of unexpected solidarity, a recognition that even chaos had its uses. In the book's finale, Peeves lived up to that command by giving hell to Voldemort's followers. The lack of this connection in the films weakened the sense of long-term continuity and character growth. What should have been a triumphant callback for loyal readers never materialized for viewers. Ultimately, Peeves represented a truth that Harry Potter emphasized again and again, that even the least predictable, least controlled forces could be harnessed for good in the face of evil. He was not a polished hero, nor a trained warrior, but he made the enemy stumble, panic, and falter. His presence in the battle underscored the theme that every part of Hogwarts, from its portraits to its poltergeist, rose to protect its children. It is this richness of detail that the films, in their efficiency, stripped away, leaving the story less textured and less true to the chaotic heart of Rowling's vision. Number 21. Albus Dumbledore's Youth and Gellert Grindelwald. Of all the stories that shaped the wizarding world, one of the most profound and haunting was the story of Albus Dumbledore's youth, a tale that the films chose to brush aside, leaving only fragments where the books offered entire layers of tragedy, ambition, and loss. When readers discovered in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows the painful memories of Dumbledore's past, it changed the perception of the man entirely. He was no longer simply the serene headmaster who guided Harry with gentle wisdom. He was revealed as someone whose own hunger for power, whose youthful mistakes, and whose inability to confront his greatest friend turned enemy had defined the course of his life. By minimizing this in the films, audiences missed a central piece of why Dumbledore acted as he did when Voldemort rose to power. In his youth, Dumbledore was not the restrained leader fans knew at Hogwarts. At 17, he was a prodigy, described by Elphias Doge as the most brilliant student Hogwarts had ever seen. His rise was meteoric, and his intellect shone in every magical discipline. But brilliance carried with it a temptation, and Dumbledore was not immune to the lure of shaping the world according to his ideals. It was at this critical juncture that he encountered Gellert Grindelwald, a meeting that changed the course of both their lives. The films show only a shadow of this connection, but in the books, the two young wizards bonded over visions of greatness. Together, they dreamed of creating a new order where wizards ruled over muggles for the greater good. Dumbledore's desire was not entirely selfish, but it was dangerous, rooted in his belief that wizards could enforce peace if given the reins of power. The tragedy of Ariana Dumbledore was the fulcrum of this entire story, and yet it was erased almost entirely from the cinematic retelling. Ariana, the younger sister of Albus and Aberforth, had been attacked by Muggle boys at a young age, leaving her traumatized and unable to control her magic. Their father, Percival, struck back at the Muggles and was imprisoned in Azkaban, where he later died. Kendra Dumbledore, their mother, kept Ariana hidden, protecting her, but also isolating her from the world. When Kendra was killed in one of Ariana's magical outbursts, the responsibility for Ariana fell upon young Albus, just when his own dreams were at their brightest. His resentment of this responsibility was one of the first cracks in his character, something he admitted later with shame. "I resented it, Harry. I was gifted. I was brilliant. I wanted to escape. I wanted to shine." When Grindelwald came into his life, Dumbledore saw a way out. The two of them spent hours discussing wizarding dominance, drawing plans for a world where their kind would stand supreme. They convinced themselves it was all for the greater good, a phrase that would later become Grindelwald's rallying cry. Rowling's text makes it clear that Albus was infatuated with the brilliance and charisma of Grindelwald to the point of overlooking what that ideology truly meant. He confessed, in the Deathly Hallows, "I was blinded by my own brilliance and by my young friend's gifts. I was selfish, Harry, more selfish than you can possibly imagine." This was not a portrait of the infallible headmaster, but of a boy who allowed ambition to cloud morality. Aberforth Dumbledore, Albus's younger brother, saw through this dangerous bond and challenged him. He accused Albus of neglecting Ariana in his pursuit of power alongside Grindelwald. Their confrontation escalated and Grindelwald drew his wand. The duel that followed remains one of the most tragic moments in the saga, for Ariana, caught in the crossfire, was killed. No one knew whose spell had struck her. Aberforth carried his grief as bitterness toward his brother, while Albus carried it as lifelong guilt. "My share in Ariana's fate is greater than yours, Harry," Dumbledore admitted. "I allowed it to happen. I might even have struck the blow that killed her." This moment broke Dumbledore's illusions forever. From that day onward, he turned away from dreams of power, shaping instead the cautious, reluctant figure who hesitated to act too decisively when facing Voldemort decades later. In the films, audiences saw Dumbledore as a mentor who occasionally held back information from Harry and who delayed direct confrontation with Voldemort until the very end. Without the context of his youth, these choices could seem frustrating or even cowardly. The books, however, made them profoundly human. Dumbledore's hesitation to seize control or to kill reflected his horror at the memory of Ariana's death. He could not face Grindelwald for many years, not because he lacked strength, but because he feared discovering the truth of whose spell had ended his sister's life. This fear shaped his entire life, turning him into a man who sought to empower others rather than dominate. That nuance was essential to understanding him, and yet it was entirely absent in the films. The eventual confrontation between Dumbledore and Grindelwald in 1945 was legendary, described as the greatest duel of the century. Dumbledore emerged victorious, ending Grindelwald's reign of terror and imprisoning him in Nurmengard. But the films did not show the weight behind that duel. The years of avoidance, the love turned sour, the guilt carried through decades. It was not just a clash of magical powers, but the resolution of a personal tragedy. By omitting this, the films reduced the duel to a historical footnote, when in truth it was the emotional climax of Dumbledore's youth. When Harry encountered Rita Skeeter's biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, he was shocked to learn of his mentor's hidden past. The revelations about Grindelwald and Ariana made Harry question whether he truly knew the man he trusted. Rowling carefully structured this to mirror Harry's journey of disillusionment and eventual understanding. "You gave him the benefit of the doubt all along," Aberforth told Harry, urging him to see Dumbledore as a flawed man rather than a saint. This was a vital lesson. Heroes are not without fault, and greatness often arises from confronting and atoning for one's mistakes. The films never gave Harry or the audience this depth of perspective. The absence of Ariana's story in the films also weakened Aberforth's role. In the books, Aberforth was a mirror to his brother, embodying bitterness and disillusionment, while Albus carried guilt and restraint. Their confrontation in the Deathly Hallows at the Hog's Head was pivotal, revealing Aberforth's long-standing resentment. Albus cared more for the greater good than he did for his family. This bitterness explained why Aberforth lived in isolation, why he distrusted causes and leaders. The films reduced him to a side character, stripping away the emotional stakes tied to the Dumbledore family. What makes this omission particularly glaring is how deeply it connects to Harry's own story. Harry's journey was one of learning that no figure, not even Dumbledore, was beyond reproach. Dumbledore's secrets forced Harry to wrestle with doubt, betrayal, and forgiveness. When Harry chose to continue Dumbledore's mission despite his flaws, it showed his growth into a leader who understood the complexity of human character. Without Dumbledore's youth being fully revealed, the films deprived Harry's arc of its most meaningful mirror. The phrase, "for the greater good," was repeated throughout the books, echoing both Grindelwald's ideology and Dumbledore's regret. It stood as a warning about how noble intentions can mask destructive ambition. Readers saw how Dumbledore's early embrace of this phrase contrasted with his later refusal to impose his will, no matter how wise he might have been. He learned that power, even with the best motives, corrupts. This philosophical depth enriched the series, transforming it from a simple battle of good versus evil into a meditation on moral responsibility. By neglecting it, the films reduced Dumbledore to a benevolent but mysterious guide. The dynamic between Dumbledore and Grindelwald also illuminated Voldemort's story. Grindelwald was not a mirror of Voldemort. He was charismatic, idealistic, and capable of inspiring true loyalty. Dumbledore's relationship with him showed why Voldemort's tyranny could not be met simply with raw power. It required understanding, patience, and the empowerment of others. Harry's ability to love, to sacrifice, and to lead others was a path Dumbledore had once failed to walk in his youth, but sought to nurture in his student. The omission of this history in the films lessened the symmetry between Dumbledore's past and Harry's present. When Dumbledore stood on the astronomy tower in Half-Blood Prince, weakened and cornered by Draco Malfoy, it was not just age that defined him, but the weight of his past. His willingness to let himself fall to entrust Snape with the final act carried echoes of his youthful failures. He had learned painfully that he must never seek to control every outcome. Instead, he entrusted others, even when it meant sacrifice. The audience who read the books felt the gravity of this choice, seeing the boy who once sought to rule transformed into the man who gave up control. The films, lacking his backstory, could not convey this transformation with the same force. The erasure of Dumbledore's youth in the films left him as a figure of mystery rather than of tragedy. Viewers saw him as wise but distant, while readers understood him as a man scarred by guilt, tempered by failure, and defined by his struggle against the temptation of power. This understanding not only deepened his character but gave greater meaning to Harry's trust, to Aberforth's bitterness, and to Grindelwald's defeat. It was one of the most important narrative threads in the entire saga, and without it, the cinematic version of Harry Potter lost much of its emotional resonance. Number 22, Gilderoy Lockhart's fate. Of all the characters who passed through Harry Potter's years at Hogwarts, few were so extravagantly drawn as Gilderoy Lockhart. In Chamber of Secrets, he was flamboyant, boastful, and utterly incompetent, yet always surrounded by an aura of celebrity. The films presented him as a figure of comic relief, brightly dressed and endlessly self-absorbed, before he vanished from the story altogether once his memory was destroyed by Ron Weasley's broken wand. But the books carried his story further, and in those pages his presence became more than a joke. He reappeared in Order of the Phoenix as a patient at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, offering a glimpse of what happens when a life built entirely upon falsehood collapses. It was one of J.K. Rowling's subtler tragedies, and it is precisely this thread that the films discarded, flattening Lockhart into a punchline rather than allowing him to embody the danger of living for nothing but fame. The tragedy of Lockhart becomes clear only when we recall the arc of his character in the second book. From the first moment Harry meets him in flourish and blots, surrounded by a crowd of shrieking witches eager for his autograph, it is obvious that his life revolves around the worship of others. He gleefully signs his books, Magical Me most of all, and insists that he alone can teach Harry how to manage the burden of fame. In truth, as Professor McGonagall and Snape silently endure his classroom antics, it is clear that he knows nothing about the subjects he claims to have mastered. What the reader later discovers is even darker. Lockhart stole the stories of other witches and wizards, used the memory charm to erase their recollections, and then repackaged their heroism as his own adventures. In his own words, "I'll take a leaf out of their books, I thought. I'll make a name for myself." This act of theft makes him not just a fraud, but a predator, feeding on the achievements of the genuinely brave. When his deception is finally revealed in the Chamber of Secrets, the irony is sharp. Attempting to erase Harry and Ron's memories with a spell he has wielded countless times before, he is undone by Ron's snapped wand. The curse rebounds upon him, and Lockhart's carefully constructed identity collapses. Rowling does not describe his downfall with cruelty. Instead, there is a strange emptiness in his voice. "Hello," he says faintly in the tunnel. "Am I a professor? I must have been. I'm wearing this." It is the collapse of a persona, the moment when every illusion falls away, leaving a hollow man behind. In the film adaptation, Kenneth Branagh's brilliant performance captured the comedy of that moment, but what followed was silence. Lockhart never appeared again on screen, leaving the audience with the impression that his story was finished. In the novels, however, his fate lingered. The reappearance of Lockhart in Order of the Phoenix is brief but powerful. When Harry, Ron, Ginny, and Hermione visit St. Mungo's to see Arthur Weasley, they pass through a ward for long-term spell damage, and there, amid the tragic cases of permanent injury, stands Gilderoy Lockhart, his blonde hair still perfectly curled, still holding a quill, as though the performance must continue. But now his memory is permanently fractured. He no longer recalls the lies that built his career, nor does he recognize the children who once sat in his classroom. He has been reduced to a childlike state, happily signing autographs for invisible fans. "I'm very well known, you know," he explains to the group, not realizing that he is repeating words spoken countless times before. It is here that the comedy becomes unbearably sad. The hospital scene revealed something essential about Rowling's world, that fame, when pursued as an end in itself, is fragile and doomed. Lockhart's memory charm had been his only real skill, a power he abused to steal the lives of others. Without it, he has nothing, not even a coherent sense of self. In the ward at St. Mungo's, he is trapped in the endless loop of a man who once longed for recognition so desperately that he destroyed others to gain it. Now, stripped of his lies, he grasps at fragments of adoration that no longer exist. The irony is haunting. He achieved immortality of a kind, not through his books, but through his shattered mind, repeating the shallow gestures of a man who lived only for applause. The novels gave Lockhart's fate additional resonance because the children who encounter him again have grown. By the time of Order of the Phoenix, Harry is 15, Hermione is deeply engaged with the fight against Voldemort, and Ron is beginning to step out from his brother's shadows. To see Lockhart again in this state is to be reminded of how far they have come and how false his path was. Where they are learning to sacrifice and to endure, he is frozen in a parody of himself. In that sense, his presence is not merely an aside, but a mirror held up to Harry and his friends, showing what it means to chase recognition without substance. There is also a darker undertone in how Lockhart fits into the broader theme of memory in the series. Memory is not only a personal possession in Rowling's world, it is a source of truth and power. Pensives allow the examination of past events, Dumbledore teaches Harry through recollections of Tom Riddle, and Voldemort's return is denied precisely because people choose to forget. Lockhart's abuse of the memory charm represents the most grotesque distortion of this theme. He did not merely erase his victims' recollections. He erased their very identities from history. In St. Mungo's, justice is poetic. The man who obliterated others' memories is now the prisoner of his own fractured mind. The films, by omitting this return, missed an opportunity to reinforce the motif of memory as a force that shapes destiny. Lockhart's fate also speaks to the idea of punishment within the wizarding world. Many villains are imprisoned in Azkaban, condemned to live under the shadow of dementors. Lockhart, by contrast, suffers a punishment more insidious, oblivion. He's not tortured by despair, but by emptiness, his life a blank page with only scattered lines of vanity. It is tempting to laugh at his childish insistence that he is very well known, but beneath the humour is a chilling reality. He has become a ghost of his own making, alive but unmoored from truth, punished not by law but by the collapse of his identity. The absence of this storyline in the films weakens the complexity of Lockhart's character. On screen, he is remembered as the bumbling narcissist who vanished after his one comic turn. In the novels, however, he is part of the broader moral landscape, a warning about deceit, ambition, and the emptiness of fame. To excise him from the later story is to flatten Rowling's narrative, removing one of its subtler explorations of how the wizarding world handles failure and corruption. It also robs the audience of a moment of reflection about the costs of living for applause. Moreover, Lockhart's tragedy resonates with the experiences of other characters. His shallow pursuit of celebrity contrasts sharply with Harry's reluctant fame, which he endures rather than seeks. It also mirrors Voldemort's obsession with immortality, though Lockhart's desire was not for eternal life but for eternal attention. Where Voldemort sacrificed his humanity for power, Lockhart sacrificed his integrity for recognition. Both, in their own ways, are reduced to hollow shells. By failing to bring Lockhart back, the films missed an opportunity to deepen these thematic connections. One can also see Lockhart's story as a critique of celebrity culture itself, especially within the wizarding world. The adoring crowds at Flourish and Blots, the endless reprinting of his smiling face on book covers, and the unquestioning devotion of witches who hung on his every word reveal how easily the public can be deceived by surface glamour. Lockhart exploited this weakness mercilessly, and his downfall exposes the fragility of such adoration. The scene at St. Mungo's becomes almost satirical in this light. A once famous man still signing autographs for no one, abandoned by the same crowds who once elevated him. Even Hermione's early admiration of Lockhart in Chamber of Secrets gains new meaning when we consider his later fate. Her initial infatuation with his books, her eagerness to attend his classes, and her defense of him reveal how even the brightest minds can be fooled by charisma and a polished image. By the time she encounters him again in the hospital, Hermione has grown wiser, and her disappointment is palpable. The contrast between her youthful gullibility and her later maturity adds another layer to Lockhart's role in the story, one entirely absent from the films. What makes Lockhart so memorable in the novels is the way his story oscillates between farce and tragedy. He is both ridiculous and pitiable, both a fraud and a victim of his own choices. The hospital scenes underline that he is not an evil man in the same way that Death Eaters are evil. He is a shallow one, undone by vanity and deception. And sometimes, Rowling suggests, that shallowness can be just as destructive, both to oneself and to others. The films, in presenting him only as comic relief, stripped away this tragic dimension, leaving only laughter where there should have been reflection. Lockhart's story, then, stands as one of the most glaring omissions in the film adaptations. His fall from glory into obscurity was not just a subplot. It was a commentary on the dangers of living through borrowed stories, of craving applause without earning it. It was a reminder that fame without substance is a prison of its own. The books allowed readers to see this lesson through the lens of a man who could not remember his own lies, while the films left him frozen in the chamber tunnels, a caricature rather than a cautionary tale. In losing that continuation, something essential was lost, the balance of comedy and tragedy that makes the wizarding world feel so close to our own. Number 23, Peter Pettigrew's death. The story of Peter Pettigrew is one of the strangest transformations in J.K. Rowling's world. In the first book, he appears only as a name, the murdered friend of James and Lily Potter. By the third book, The Prisoner of Azkaban, the shocking twist reveals that Pettigrew has been alive all along, hiding in the form of Scabbers the rat. That revelation alone reshaped the narrative of the wizarding world, showing that betrayal and cowardice can alter the course of history just as much as courage and bravery. In the novels, Pettigrew's journey ends with poetic justice, but in the films, his arc dissolves into an afterthought, his death handled without weight or significance. This dissonance between page and screen leaves one of the saga's most meaningful threads hanging. The books carefully craft Pettigrew as the embodiment of weakness. His cowardice defines him, but Rowling never presents him as purely evil. Unlike Voldemort, who chooses cruelty and domination, Pettigrew serves because he is too afraid to resist. He lacks strength, but his treachery costs lives. "Then you should have died," Sirius Black screams in The Prisoner of Azkaban. "Died rather than betray your friends as we would have done for you." This line captures the essence of Pettigrew's crime. He lived when he should have chosen loyalty, and in doing so condemned James and Lily to death. The novels consistently return to this theme, emphasizing that cowardice can be as destructive as malice. When Voldemort regains a body in the Goblet of Fire, it is Pettigrew who performs the dark ritual. His silver hand, conjured by Voldemort as a reward, becomes a symbol of false power. In the book, Rowling describes it as gleaming unnaturally, stronger than flesh, a grotesque gift from his master. This moment cements the twisted relationship between Voldemort and Pettigrew, a dynamic of domination and servitude where Voldemort toys with Pettigrew's fear while binding him ever tighter. That silver hand is more than a weapon. It is a curse disguised as a gift, a perfect metaphor for the price of betrayal. The culmination of Pettigrew's story arrives in The Deathly Hallows. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione are captured and dragged into the dungeons of Malfoy Manor, Pettigrew enters the scene. He is supposed to kill Harry on Voldemort's orders, and everything about the moment points toward another act of cowardly obedience. Yet Rowling inserts a flicker of humanity. When Harry appeals to Pettigrew's debt, reminding him that Harry once saved his life in The Prisoner of Azkaban, something inside him falters. The text says his own silver fingers seemed to tighten momentarily, then slackened. In that split second, Pettigrew hesitates, showing compassion for the boy who had spared him. It is the smallest act of decency, but in Rowling's moral universe, such hesitation carries weight. It is then that Voldemort's enchantment takes hold. The silver hand, once presented as a prize, becomes an executioner. Rowling writes, the hand he had been given twitched violently. Pettigrew gasped in pain, his own hand tightening in a vice-like grip around his throat. He dies, strangled by his master's gift, undone by the very magic that bound him to Voldemort. The scene is chilling, yet profoundly fitting. Pettigrew's humanity costs him his life, and Voldemort's cruelty ensures that even loyalty cannot save a servant who dares to waver. This ending is not only poetic justice, but also a reminder that choices, no matter how small, define a person's fate. The films, however, strip this moment of its power. In The Deathly Hallows Part 1, Pettigrew enters the dungeons, but his death is rushed and almost invisible. Dobby's intervention distracts him, and he collapses in the background. There is no silver hand tightening around his throat, no moral reckoning, no sense of inevitability. To viewers who never read the books, Pettigrew simply vanishes from the story. His betrayal, his guilt, his cursed hand, All of it dissolves without resolution. It is one of the most jarring omissions in the adaptations, robbing audiences of a vital thematic moment. What makes this absence so glaring is that Pettigrew's arc is not minor. He is the reason Harry became the boy who lived in the first place. Without his betrayal, Voldemort would never have found James and Lily. Without his aid, Voldemort would not have returned in the fourth book. Pettigrew embodies the danger of cowardice, the price of choosing self-preservation over principle. To end his story without the full weight of his demise is to weaken the moral structure Rowling built so carefully. His death is not about spectacle, it is about the consequence of choices. By reducing it to a background scuffle, the films silence a crucial echo in the saga. The novels insist on balance. Loyalty is rewarded, betrayal punished. The Marauders story, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, is a tragedy built on this moral equation. James dies bravely, Sirius dies fighting, Remus dies defending the future. Pettigrew, in contrast, dies strangled by his own hand, a death that is at once humiliating and just. Without that moment, the Marauders' tale feels incomplete. Fans of the book see this clearly, feeling the hollow space where justice should have been. The films, in cutting corners, robbed viewers of closure. The Silver Hand also represents something larger about Voldemort's reign. Voldemort gives gifts only to control, never to empower. The hand is a chain, not a reward. In killing Pettigrew, it demonstrates Voldemort's paranoia, his absolute intolerance for weakness, even in moments of fleeting hesitation. Rowling uses Pettigrew's end to illustrate the futility of serving evil. No matter how loyal, no servant can survive a master who views compassion as treachery. The lesson is clear, and its absence in the films weakens Voldemort's characterization as well, leaving him merely a tyrant rather than a master manipulator who engineers his servants' downfall. Consider the emotional power this scene could have had on screen. Imagine the audience watching Pettigrew's silver hand tighten around his own throat, gasping as he realizes that Voldemort has condemned him to death for a single act of mercy. Imagine Harry's face as he sees the cost of sparing Pettigrew years earlier, realizing that mercy still mattered, even if it ended in tragedy. That visual would have lingered with viewers, echoing through the final battle, as a warning about the dangers of compromise and the unforgiving nature of evil. Instead, the films give us a clumsy collapse, a death so quick it is easy to miss. In analyzing why the filmmakers might have chosen this path, one could argue that time constraints forced their hand. The seventh book is dense, filled with events and revelations, and the adaptation had to make difficult cuts. Yet the omission of Pettigrew's true ending is not just a casualty of pacing, it is a casualty of storytelling priorities. The films favored spectacle over subtle moral lessons, choosing battles and escapes over quiet reckonings. But Rowling's strength lies in those reckonings. Pettigrew's death is not loud, but it is meaningful, and its removal speaks to a larger trend of simplifying complex characters in order to streamline the plot. For readers, Pettigrew's end lingers precisely because it is not grand. It is pathetic, painful, and deeply human. His hesitation is not a heroic act but a reflex, a twitch of the soul that even the most broken man cannot suppress. That humanity, however faint, collides fatally with Voldemort's cruelty. In that moment, the saga tells us something profound. Even the weakest, most treacherous person is still capable of choice, and those choices still matter. Pettigrew dies not because he was irredeemable, but because he dared to act in a way that Voldemort could not forgive. The films deny us that truth. By erasing the Silver Hand's betrayal, they erase the theme of humanity in the face of darkness. They deny viewers the reminder that choices, however small, ripple outward. Pettigrew's story is not about redemption, but about the cost of cowardice and the impossibility of serving evil without consequence. Without that final twist, his arc looks unfinished, his betrayal unresolved, his punishment random. The Harry Potter films excel in many ways, but in this they falter, leaving a hole where justice and meaning should have been. For those who know only the films, Pettigrew remains a side character who fades into obscurity. For readers, he is a haunting figure, a man who reminds us that weakness can be deadly, that loyalty matters, and that mercy carries weight even when it ends in tragedy. The book's version of his death is a warning carved in silver. A servant of darkness can never escape the cruelty of the master he chose. That is the fate of Peter Pettigrew, and it deserved to be told in full. Number 24, Dumbledore's Army Resistance in Hogwarts. When the Triwizard Tournament ended in tragedy with the death of Cedric Diggory, the wizarding world trembled. Voldemort had returned, and the Ministry chose denial over action. In the shadows of this political blindness, one group of students formed something greater than a school club. Dumbledore's army was not just a gathering of teenagers practicing spells, it was a seed of rebellion that continued to grow long after Harry Potter left the school. In the books, this resistance became a living force inside Hogwarts, transforming corridors into battlegrounds and classrooms into hidden sanctuaries. The films, however, compressed this fire of revolution into scattered images, leaving out the depth of courage and leadership that made this storyline unforgettable. The true continuation of Dumbledore's army began when Hogwarts itself became a prison. With Severus Snape as headmaster and the Carrow siblings, Alecto and Amicus, installed as professors, education was twisted into indoctrination. Students were forced to learn the dark arts instead of defense against the dark arts, and discipline meant cruelty. Yet in the middle of this fear, Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley and Luna Lovegood refused to let Dumbledore's vision die. "The DA's never really been disbanded," Neville told Harry in the Deathly Hallows. This one line carried the weight of months of defiance that the films only brushed against. Neville's transformation was one of the most powerful examples of growth in the entire saga. In the Sorcerer's Stone, he was the boy who couldn't keep hold of his toad and trembled in front of bullies. By the final book, he had become a commander within Hogwarts, orchestrating secret meetings, recruiting allies, and shielding younger students from the Carrow's wrath. Rowling describes how Neville used the Room of Requirement as a headquarters, a hidden fortress that provided food, shelter, and safety. "It's the only place left for us," Neville explained, showing how the DA had evolved into a true underground resistance. The films gave us a glimpse of Neville's bravery, but they cut short the full story of how he carried the weight of rebellion on his shoulders. The Room of Requirement itself became almost a character in the books during this time. It shifted and adapted to meet the needs of the DA, producing hammocks when students needed rest, food when they had to hide for days, and weapons when it was time to strike. This magical room represented hope in a world that seemed to be collapsing. Every time Neville and the others retreated into its safety, they were keeping alive not just themselves, but also the idea that Hogwarts still belonged to them. In the film adaptation, the room became a brief battleground during the final showdown, but the long months of survival within its walls were lost, erasing the sense of a fortress of resistance that made the DA legendary. Ginny Weasley's role in this period is another crucial thread missing from the screen. While the films portrayed her mostly as Harry's love interest, the books showed her as a fierce and determined leader. She was instrumental in organizing attacks against the Carrows and keeping morale high. Ginny's bravery mirrored the fiery determination of her brothers, and she showed the same readiness to sacrifice that defined the Weasley family. When she re-entered Hogwarts in the Deathly Hallows after being forced to leave for safety, she did not come quietly. Instead, she joined Neville and Luna in keeping the DA alive. Her story was not one of passive waiting, but of active resistance, and without it, the films robbed viewers of understanding just how central she was to the fight. Luna Lovegood also stood tall during this time. Known for her eccentricity, she revealed herself as one of the most unshakable allies of Dumbledore's army. Even when she was abducted and taken to Malfoy Manor, the strength she had gained from her DA days allowed her to endure captivity without breaking. In Hogwarts, she had helped keep the spirit of rebellion alive, offering hope and courage when fear was thick in the air. Her optimism and imagination became weapons just as sharp as spells, inspiring others to keep fighting. The movies showed Luna's kindness, but they did not emphasize her role as a revolutionary spirit within the walls of Hogwarts. What made the DA's survival during this dark era so meaningful was the way ordinary students became extraordinary. Names like Seamus Finnegan, Ernie Macmillan, and Hannah Abbott gained weight because they were not just background characters anymore. They became soldiers. Seamus, in particular, underwent a change from being skeptical of Harry in earlier books to standing firmly by Neville's side. Rowling describes how his face bore scars from punishment, a physical reminder of what defiance cost, yet he continued fighting. In the films, Seamus remained a minor presence, but in the books, his journey symbolized the awakening of Hogwarts youth into warriors for freedom. One of the most vivid passages in the Deathly Hallows shows how the Carrows tried to stamp out resistance by targeting students directly. Detentions turned into torture sessions, and younger students were forced to watch or even participate. Neville, however, refused to break. When the Carrows threatened to use the Cruciatus curse on first years, he stood in their way. "They used to try and force me to join in," Neville recalled. "It got worse and worse, and in the end, I had to make a run for it." These words underline the unbearable pressure he faced, yet his refusal turned him into a beacon. Such moments painted Neville not only as a hero, but as the embodiment of Gryffindor courage, something the films underplayed by not showing the extent of his suffering and defiance. The DA also gave Hogwarts students a sense of belonging and family when the school itself had been stolen from them. Every act of sabotage, every poster hung in defiance, every whispered password into the room of requirement echoed the message that Voldemort's rule would not last forever. This atmosphere of quiet revolution set the stage for the Battle of Hogwarts long before Harry returned. The final stand was not sudden. It was the natural eruption of a resistance that had been burning for months in secret. The films presented the battle as though Hogwarts only rose once Harry reappeared, but in truth, the DA had been preparing the ground all along.